2,000 years ago, on the shores of northwest Europe, lived a tribe called the Angli, or Angles, ancestors of the English-speaking peoples. The Roman historian, Tacitus, said that they were one of 7 tribes who sacrificed to the goddess Mother Earth by drowning people in bogs. In Denmark, more recently, the descendants of those people, digging for peat, have made some remarkable discoveries. Victims of these tribes have been perfectly preserved in the bog. This man was strangled. This man's throat was cut. The language of this savage people is now the most widely spoken in the world.
I speak English with a Canadian accent.
I speak English with a Jamaican accent.
English with an English
as it is spoken.
I speak English with a I speak English with English.
I teach English. Learning to speak English.
The English language was brought to Britain by invaders from the sea.
Síðan eastan hýr engla ansiakse uppe ved komman og förberade brymmo brutene saktan.
The Britons were hounded into exile and branded foreigners or weirlass, hence the word Welsh.
Walanko vi smidas och i alls och förkomman i orles archwate i arde begetan.
To this day, there's hardly a trace of Welsh in the English language.
Da wallas flucharna England svafyra.
And in due course, the invaders renamed the country Engleland. This film will show how a few obscure Germanic dialects were transformed into the English of Geoffrey Chaucer and William Shakespeare. The story starts when the Jutes, who were the first of the so-called Anglo-Saxon tribes to invade England, landed in Kent in the year 449 AD. They were followed by the Angles, the Saxons, and the Frisians from northern Holland. In Holland, to this day, descendants of those early pirates have a language that is often identical to our own. Farmer Martin Sittimer, who commutes by canal, is one of 300,000 Frisian speakers. The strong Germanic echoes of English can be heard in his everyday speech. Most people associate Frisia with cows. They might be surprised to know that Frisians use the same word.
Dat is koe.
And the word for lamb?
Dat is een lam.
And a goose?
Dat is een goose.
And foal?
Dat is een vale.
And how about boat?
Dat is een boot.
And a similar word for pole?
Dat is een peel.
And dung?
In tongen.
And rain?
Dat is rein.
And even a cup of coffee?
Een kopje koffie.
It's no accident that the Dutch and Scandinavians often seem to speak better English than the English themselves. In fact, English is closer to German, Dutch, and Scandinavian than any other languages. Like Martin Sittimer, the Anglo-Saxons who invaded England were an agricultural people. Their art is full of farming. The Anglo-Saxons have given us many of the words we use today, words like sheep, shepherd, ox, earth, plough, work. Words like dog, wood, field, and swine. And after the hard work of daily life in the field, they loved to celebrate, from which come words like glee, laughter, and mirth. The language of the Anglo-Saxons is called Old English, and it's impossible to write a modern English sentence without using a feast of Old English words.
Well, there is a very important and clear connection between present-day English and Old English. One could perhaps take an analogy of a family with the name of English who lived in the same rural district from the beginning of English history, from about 800 or 900, say, and they've kept the same name. They've had marriages with Danes, they've had marriages with French, marriages with Italians, marriages with many other people, but they've remained essentially English, and I think the English language is like that. One can see how close the connection is if one takes a simple sentence. In modern English we might say, this queen will be glad if this king sings. In Old English, Theos queen will abound glad if this king singeth.
Old English looks like a foreign language, but modernise the spelling and the sentence becomes much clearer. This queen will be glad if the king sings. The Old English alphabet makes the language seem strange, yet most people can learn to read and understand it in 2 or 3 hours.
Uchtere was Whalhunter.
Uchtere was Whalhunter.
He was Swedish-speaking man.
He was Swedish-speaking man.
At Kiel University, students learn Old English through headphones.
He was med den første mannen on dem lande.
On them lande whereon Finnas.
On them lande whereon Finnas.
Sa Finnas whereon Fisheras and Fugleras.
The Finnas whereon Fisheras and Fugleras.
The main difference between Old English and modern English is structural. Old English was an inflected language.
Helgoland.
That land is Helgoland.
Helgoland is Swedelang and Swedesmal.
Helgoland is Swedelang and Swedesmal.
The Old English for the king is se Kuninge. Of the king is thas Kuninges, to the king is tham Kuninge. All the words have endings that change, and it's the endings that convey the meaning in an inflected language.
Well, an inflected language is a language in which you can tell the difference, shall we say, between the subject and the object of a sentence by the form of the word.
It's the form of the words, not word order, that carries meaning in a sentence like Seo quen, kusith, vona kuning. In modern English, we always use the same word order. The queen is the subject of the sentence. Kisses is the verb. King is the object.
Seo quain, kisseth, thona kuning. Now you can see the seo quain, thona kuning, thona can only be the object. So you could also say thona kuning, kisseth seo quain, and that would still mean the queen kisses the king. Whereas in modern English, of course, it would mean the king kisses the queen because word order is so important today.
It's almost 1,000 years since anyone spoke pure Anglo-Saxon, but today, for some patriots, it's still a living language. These people are the English companions on one of their regular outings. They're always enthusiastic for any place that puts them in touch with Anglo-Saxon history. This weekend, they're braving the elements to visit the site of the Battle of Malden, a famous Anglo-Saxon military catastrophe, celebrated in verse.
Well, it says in the Chronicle here, for the year 993, Her on thisum jaar kom anlaf mid drimmen hunnigontigum shipum Tostana, which is Folkestone.
This must have been very, very wet and not terribly suitable for fighting on.
Not the place you'd normally choose for a pitched battle, no.
The English army would have been drawn up somewhere in this vicinity. Bietnoff was killed in the early stages, it seems, and then his bodyguard made a last stand. and fought to the last man around his body in typical heroic fashion.
Shall we then drink to the memory of the dead Saxons? Where's ale?
The Anglo-Saxons are famous for their love of drink and their earthy good humour.
Where's the heart?
There's even an Old English word, ealw sherwin,
Where's heart?
ale fear, terror at the loss of ale. But the English companions think that this has created a false image of their heroic forebears.
Well, I would have thought a drunken lout making his way across the fields in a rather zigzag sort of path to a rather falling down little hut and a rather muddy wife and hordes of children. Nobody having any culture or poetry or anything at all in their lives.
Most people's opinions, and indeed the opinion I was taught at school, was that the Anglo-Saxons were a bunch of troublemakers and couldn't control themselves until the Normans came.
Whereas in fact it was well organised politically, religiously, culturally by that time, since about the year 600, and that's an awful lot of English history which most people are totally unaware of. An awful lot of lost culture.
The companions cherish this lost culture, and above all, take great pride in the unique achievement of its literature.
So this really was the last great battle poem, as you say, that was composed in Anglo-Sax. Did you say, Malcolm, you could read a bit to us?
Yes. Burchtwold Mathelode, Bord Hafnode, Sewas Yaldia Net, Asha Wechte, Heifel Balgliche, Bernus Lerde. Here shall they hiadre, Hjorte they keinre, Mood shall they mare,
The Anglo-Saxons were a very sophisticated people. The helmet from Seppenhoe reminds us of the range and vitality of early Anglo-Saxon settlement. The jewellery tells us an enormous lot about the complexity and the sophistication of the Anglo-Saxon mind, something that in the past we tended to neglect. If you take, for example, the great gold bottle of Seppenhoe, it is a superb piece of jewellery. If you look at it closely, you can see there the miracle of interlacing, the miracle of handling of animal ornamentation that goes to make a single unity of a jewel. There is bird of prey on duck, man between two beasts. He's expressed part of his artistic soul. And the same skills applied to the literary field give us, of course, the best of our Anglo-Saxon poems.
The Anglo-Saxons were more sophisticated than us in one area, which was arts of speech, and that includes poetry. They value understatement, and they like riddles, and they do like poems that go in circles. But when you come round to the circle, you realise that you've got to take it an entirely different way. So there is, I think, in fact, something even devious about them, though they like to cultivate an air of plain bareness. Well, this is not an unknown art even now, but they're a lot better at it than we are.
This bare, bleak island on the northeast coast of England is Holy Island, the site of the monastery of Lindisfarne. It is one of the most celebrated centres of Anglo-Saxon Christianity and culture. The monks who worked on these astonishing paintings also found their vocabulary enriched by new gospel words from Latin and Greek. Words like altar, angel, martyr, psalm. The mingling of Old English with the European Latin tradition gave the language its incredible richness and vitality.
Under Sion felle, sedje je hulkum, dare de an sulke starrath.
By the end of the 8th century, the marriage of Christianity with Anglo-Saxon England had made a culture unmatched in Europe.
Hond hundra mest, je lokken leotukraftum.
Words and pictures had both achieved a kind of perfection.
Burgstede Burstan, Brosna Thente je Weorg, Rovas in je Rorna, Riorje Torras.
This achievement faced extinction at the hands of the Vikings in the year 793.
In the Viking Age, England suffered heavily at the hands of the men of the north. They came in their longships, and they raided, and they settled. Even now, to this day, we can see traces of their presence in the place names, for example, of Yorkshire and of Lancashire. England, in fact, suffered what was, in part, the result of a migration from the north during the reign of Alfred.
But for one man, Alfred the Great, the story of the language might have been quite different. By defeating the Vikings, Alfred saved not only his own kingdom, but the English language itself.
So there was a moment in 878 when it was quite possible that there would be no English-speaking kingdoms left in a very short period of time. But Alfred managed to retain a political centre and to retain power over his kingdom, and as a result, English remained the language of a state. What I think he was therefore very sensitive about was the spread of other languages, especially Danish, but also the loss of political control over anybody who spoke English. And he did that, I suppose, by appealing to a common sense of Englishness, which was conveyed by the language.
Alfred exploited the English language to create a sense of national identity among his soldiers and subjects. After many battles, he forced peace on the Vikings. Alfred and the English-speaking Saxons ruled in the south. The Vikings withdrew to the north. But gradually, this language frontier broke down, and wherever the Vikings and the English mixed, it was usually Saxon English that came to be spoken and written. This little church in Kirkdale, North Yorkshire, tells the whole story of how the Vikings almost won the war and how they lost the peace. In the porch is a sundial. Chiselled into the stone is the name of the man who made it. He has the resoundingly Viking name, Orm Gammelson. But on closer inspection, the inscription turns out to be in Old English. Barely 100 years after his people invaded, Orm Gammelson is writing, and presumably thinking, in English. Thanks to Vikings like Orm Gammelson, the structure and vocabulary of English were never the same again.
One might consider what happens when somebody who speaks good Old English, from the south of the country, shall we say, runs into somebody from the northeast who speaks good Old Norse. They can no doubt communicate with each other, but the interlocking parts, the complications, are not going to come over at all. So, if the Anglo-Saxon, the person speaking good Old English, says, I'll sell you the horse that pulls my cart, he says, it's sell they, that horse, the drageth, mean wine. And the Old Norseman would, if he had to say it, he would say, ek mun selja there, crossit, the drager wagen mean. So they understand each other. One says wagen and the other says wine. One says horse and the other says cross. One says drageth and the other says drager. So they understand each other. They understand the main words. What they don't understand are the grammatical words. For instance, the person who speaks good Old English says, for one horse, that horse. But for two horses, he says, the horse. The North speaker understands the word horse all right, but he doesn't understand that it means one or two, because you say one horse, two horse. There's no difference between the two words. The difference is in the word for the, and he might not understand that because he hasn't actually got a similar word for the. So, are you trying to sell me one horse, or are you trying to sell me two horses? If you get enough situations like that, I think, there is a strong drive towards simplifying the system.
Old English was complicated. The word thee, say, could have several different forms. And as we have already seen, common words, like king, relied on word endings. By the 10th century, the language was becoming more and more like modern English. The Pidgin English, spoken by the Vikings, was slowly eliminating these word endings.
There's in Old English you say one stan, two stanas. You say one road, that's a cross, two roda. You say one erga, but you say two ergan. You say one boke, but two bach. Nowadays we don't bother with any of that. We say stone, stones, cross, crosses, eyes, book, books. You say the same thing for all the plurals. We've simplified the system. We simplified the system, I think, not because it was unworkable. It was unworkable. I mean, it was workable for people who are native speakers of Old English, but it gets very difficult if you are talking to somebody who does not have a total grasp of it, and perhaps particularly difficult if you're talking to somebody who has a 90% grasp of it. The 10% is just enough difficulty to make you go away with the wrong impression. I think it's very much the situation you have now between, say, Danes and Swedes. They think they can understand each other, they say they can understand each other, but they go away from the same interview with different opinions about what's actually been agreed. Well, that gives a very strong drive, I think, towards simplification.
In Anglo-Saxon England, books were as highly specialised as computer programs are today, and the standardised written word was just as remote from the lives of ordinary people. Spoken English was less formal and varied greatly from region to region.
Ze koning Athelbert antwoordde Augustina.
En sprak Christine dat is our walde.
Viking and Saxon were meeting face to face, and English achieved its first great simplifying compromise.
And he båda de godes word, som kunninge und his leode, durch their werk ståda mot.
Before the age of the printing press, it was words passing from mouth to mouth that changed the language most, especially when the words were set to music.
Wat wij gardenen in de jerde komt vrij uit kuninga, voor mij vrienden, hoe de achterlinge zijn vreemden aan. Op de schulschaving schea de atreia toen man, ik kon mij extremon als het hoofde ja.
The fusion of Saxon and Viking is epitomized in the language of Beowulf, a poetic masterpiece sung here as it might have been in the mead halls after feasting.
Op uit in mij gultjen zit ben ra, og weer rare huren sjalla. Gummen julan, dat was God kuning.
Well, speaking both personally and professionally, I think it's one of the great monuments of English literature that will always repay the reader. And the really important point to make is, I think, that anybody who speaks English can begin to read at least Old English prose within 2 or 3 hours. So it's certainly not a poem locked up in a drawer that only philologists can open. It's accessible to many people. It reveals a reflective and ruminative temper of mind, a mind keenly, almost obsessed with the transience of life, with heroism, with being dignified in the face of defeat and hopeless combat.
Harold, the last English-speaking king for nearly 300 years, was crowned in 1066. The Norman invasion destroyed Old English society, but its language lived on. The Anglo-Saxon achievement could not be suppressed, even by William the Conqueror.
Daar kom Wilhelm, Earl of Normandy, into Pevensey.
Count William came from Normandy to Pevensey.
This where da Harold the
King Harold assembled an army.
William him kom on yen on unaware.
William attacked him before his army was drawn up.
There were slagen Harold the King and Leof.
There King Harold was killed,
his brother,
and the French remained masters of the field. The word castle comes from French and this was now the language spoken by the Norman knights in castles like Dover. An early English writer known as Robert of Gloucester vividly describes this sudden change.
Dos komlo England into Normandies honde, and the Normans ne kutha speka do botur owe speche, and speka French as he do at home, and their children do also teach.
William himself tried to learn English at the age of 43, but was too busy to keep it up. Later Norman kings were often totally ignorant of English, and in upper-class circles it became... To this day, the use of French words is thought to show a certain sophistication and savoir-faire.
One of the ways in which the French invasion, linguistic invasion of English, affected the language was that in many instances we had the best of both worlds. We kept the Old English word and we added the French word, so that we then had a choice of two.
The Anglo-Saxons had only one word for kingly. The Normans brought in royal, and other European influences added regal and sovereign. The capacity to express as many as 4 different shades of meaning and to make fine distinctions is one of the hallmarks of the English language after the conquest.
So you see, what started as an invasion, a military invasion with the death of a lot of people and disaster in monasteries, has turned out, in a way, to be very much a linguistic blessing, because we have undoubtedly today got a richer language, a more supple language, a more wide-ranging language than we had in Anglo-Saxon times.
In the great Norman cathedrals like Durham, Latin was still the official language. The Normans slowly purged the English-speaking bishops. In the year 1155, the English monks who wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle abandoned their work forever. Going by the written record, English seems to have become almost obliterated. But in common speech, the language of every man was still English.
For botte man konne French, me telleth of him lutte. A klaue men holdeth to English and to her owe speche jute.
When the Norman French took over this country, it had, of course, an enormous impact on the language. But it's very, very easy to exaggerate it. If you take something like the Lord's Prayer, you will see how the basis of the language remains unchanged. Thus, the first line of the Anglo-Saxon version, written around 1000 AD, went like this: Ura Fader, through the art on heavenum, see thee nama Yahalwat. And compare that now with the Chaucerian version, as it were, the version written in Chaucer's time. Ura Fader, that art in heavens, hallowed be thee nama. Now there's virtually no change there.
These old manuscripts are part of a vast historical archive of government records dating back to the 12th and 13th centuries. All are written in French or Latin. But scholars like Michael Clanchy have found a number of clues in the Public Record Office to suggest that this perspective may be a false one. We cannot assume, Clanchy argues, that Norman government officials would automatically speak French. In fact, they became quickly integrated into English society.
A contemporary around 1180 says that by that time Normans and English were so intermarried as to be indistinguishable. That's a century after the Norman conquest.
And barely 100 years later, Anglo-Norman children were learning French like a foreign language.
you can show from 1250, from a knight called Walter of Bibbsworth wrote a book designed for English-speaking people to show them how to speak French, how to learn French. And so French was a language which educated people could speak, but I think it was, by and large, a learned language.
This document proves Clancy's case. It contains the first example of written English in a government document. It's a report of a royal lawsuit. The clerk, who was probably bilingual, like a common market civil servant, lost for a suitable word, describes it in English as nameless or pointless.
Scholars have perhaps been misled because we are taught and learn to respect writings, and of course that is what has survived, these masses of writings, whereas speech has been lost.
So the French of the castles and the Latin of the churches were islands in a sea of English, spoken by people who leave no records. The proof that the language is alive and well comes from sermons and church music. Christopher Page and his musicians rehearse and play early English music in medieval churches around the country. By the 14th century, the English language, which for so long had flourished only on the lips of the common people, now begins an official life of its own. This song is in Latin. But a contemporary English translation of it has survived. This song comes to us in quite a familiar form. It's known as Middle English. Middle English is much more recognizable than the language of the Anglo-Saxons, but there were still several different dialects. To the north of the River Humber is the northern dialect. In Alfred the Great's old kingdom is the southern dialect. In Kent there is the separate dialect of the southeast. The Midlands are divided east and west. All these divisions are astonishingly similar to modern English dialect boundaries. Within the East Midlands itself, one small nucleus of power, trade and learning shared the same dialect. The triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London is the basis of standard English in the 20th century. One man who has been studying the bizarre nuances of English speech for over 30 years is Stanley Ellis. Today, he's going to tape record a Yorkshire farm worker. He's asking Erwin Bealby about different northern terms for water courses.
Erwin, you've been in farming all your life. Farming's altered a lot, hasn't it?
Oh, by God.
Yeah.
There's no comparison to when I started.
No. In the old days, how did you get your drainage to the fields? The gutters would be drains, and the gutters would then run out into the...
They ran out into the beck.
Ah, yes. Now, what's the difference between a beck and a gutter, then?
Why, of course, a beck's considerably wider than gutter. I mean, they're varied as becks in... I mean, you might not be very wide, or you might get a great deep hole, you see, and... Well, we used to bathe it beck, you know.
Oh, did you?
Oh, aye.
Yeah.
Went halloking down here, and it was not to eat nuddy, you know, and lope into water.
For any non-Yorkshire person in the audience who didn't understand what Erwin said, let's listen to that again.
Well, we used to bathe it beck, you know.
Oh, did you?
Oh, aye.
Yeah.
Went halloking down here, and it was not to eat nuddy, you know, and lope into water.
He's using forms that go back to the Middle English period, when he uses pronunciations scattered right through his talk of hoose and doon and roon and all these ow words. That goes back to Middle English, the unchanged form of the Old English sound that will be heard oo, which was oo in Middle English, and then in Standard English became ow.
Down south in Kent, a pupil of Stanley Ellis, David North, is talking to farm worker Frank Cooper.
Oh, well, we got to know Wegner. His name was Taffy Skinner. And I was up in there.
He's also making a record of local words for watercourses.
What do you call a sort of stretch of water at the edge of a field that you used to drain the field with?
A stretch of water, a pond?
Well, a sort of thing along the hedge, you know, to drain the...
Oh, the ditch. Dike. Well, some call it dike, and we used to call it... Here, old people called it ditch.
Is dike the same thing?
Yes, just the same thing.
And what's the word for a sort of larger watercourse? Not a river, but a bit smaller than a river.
Well, you either have a stream or a pond. We would call it a pond, I should think.
But the piece of running water, what would you call that?
Well, stream.
The reason why it's easier to understand a man from Kent than a man from Yorkshire, I think, is the geographical reason for it. A, it's close to London, so it's close to the variety which eventually became Standard English.
12-year-old. You see, it's only a matter of chance or the whole development of a society that made London English, which was in fact a regional dialect in its early stage, a language which became in fact a social language, the language of the upper classes, and therefore the Standard English and pronunciation that we have that's national today. If the Scandinavians had won that battle at Stamford Bridge up the road, we might even have had Northern English as a standard form. Would have been quite easy.
Standard English is as much a dialect as the dialects of Kent or Yorkshire or any other part of the country or any other part of the English-speaking world. It's just a variety which, for a number of non-linguistic reasons, has become prominent and socially acceptable due to the development of the capital, development of printing, the centralisation of the government and so on.
The Queen's English, or Standard English, is the prestige dialect. The courtiers, merchants and scholars who spoke this South-East Midland dialect gave it an automatic superiority. And this illuminated manuscript shows them listening to the first great writer who composed his poetry not in French or Latin, but in English, using the dialect of his native London.
In the 14th century, English came into its own again. The career of one man, perhaps, exemplifies the triumph of English more than any other, and that is Geoffrey Chaucer. He does, as it were, symbolise the dominance of South-East Midland English, which became the basis of modern English, and which is spoken to this very day, not only in England, but in Australia, in America, which, in other words, is a universal language in 20th century context.
Let's stand by, studio, and we'll try a take. Okay, let's roll. On the light, please.
In the 50s and 60s, recitals of Chaucer's work were recorded.
Here beginneth the book of the Tales of Canterbury. When that April with his surest sauter the drucht of March hath persed to the rota, and bathed every vine in sich liqueur, of which virtue engendred is the flour. Then longen folk to goon on pilgrimages.
Chaucer is one of the geniuses on whom English has always depended for its important breakthroughs. He took as his subjects all classes of men and women, the knight, the prioress, and the famous wife of Bath. Chaucer was alive to the energy and potential of the language of everyday speech. He pokes fun at Yorkshire dialects. He dazzles the reader with wordplay. And he mocks the pretensions of people who claim to know French and Latin.
Well loved he garlic, oinons, and eglaicus, and for to drinken strong wine, red as blood. Then wilt he spake and cry as he were word, And when that he well drunken had the wine, then would he spake no word but Latin.
Many of Chaucer's words are Anglo-Saxon, but he spells and uses them in a more modern way. Instead of se kuning, he writes the king. Instead of fas kuningus, he writes of the king. And instead of fam kuninge, he writes to the king. So the first big difference between Old English and Middle English is that Chaucer is using prepositions, words like of and to, instead of word endings. Without word endings, word order becomes crucial. The queen kisses the king. Now, if you change the order of these words, you change the whole meaning of the sentence. The king kisses the queen. So the structure of Chaucer's English is recognisably modern. The pronunciation is different. Yet this actress, who has never performed Chaucer before, can master his language in half an hour.
There was also a nonny, a prioress, that of her smiling was full simple and coy. Her greatest oath was but by Saint Eloi.
The first one is the word nun, and the vowel sound at this time must have been oh, so it should be. There was also a nun.
A nun.
A nun.
There was also a nun, a prioressa, that of her smiling was full simple and coy.
That was, it needs to go was. The Middle English, the 14th century pronunciation, is slightly different. It's not was. Yes.
That of her smiling was full simple and coy. Her greatest oath was but be Saint Eloi, and she was clept Madame Eglantine.
She, of course, should be she. The vowel in he and she is an A, not an E. She.
She. And French, she spake. She. And French, she spake full fire, and fetisly, after the school of Stratford at Aboa. For French of Paris was to hear. For French of Paris was to hear on knoa.
I think that's very good, Norman.
Indeed, it's pretty good, yes.
So it's Mary next, please.
There was also a nun, a prioress, that of her smiling was full simple and coy. Her greatest oath was but be Saint Eloi, and she was cleped Madame Eglantine.
Chaucer wrote in English, but the language of government was still officially French. Yet only 17 years after his death, Henry V becomes the first English king since Harold to use English in his official documents. In the summer of 1417, Henry crossed the Channel to fight the French. This is the first letter dictated on French soil in which he chooses symbolically not to write in the language of his enemies.
Henry V is the first king to use English in his documents in order to distinguish his English conquerors of France from the French people. It's a move towards, it's a national statement.
The break with French after the Battle of Agincourt was decisive, a turning point, like Alfred's defeat of the Vikings. Henry's predecessor, Edward III, could only swear in English, but now it was officially the language of English kings. After Chaucer the poet and Henry the king, the English language comes down to a more popular level. It takes a dramatic new form in the mouths of the first professional actors.
Worshipful sovereigns, join voices with us to summon the devil, Titivolus.
Cry a pass, and you should bring him in with a shout.
Titivolus. 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 Titivolus.
company, the medieval players, are performing Mankind, one of the smash hits of the 15th century theatre, outside the porch of Lincoln Cathedral, near the site of its earliest performances.
Ego sum dominantium dominus. And me nam. Is te divolus. Welfare.
Here the devil, Titivolus, prepares for the temptation of mankind. Under the spell of Satan and his henchmen, mankind, a hard-working peasant, will be made to swear an oath of loyalty to the 7 deadly sins. But in the end, having been saved from suicide, the deadliest sin of all, he repents and is forgiven.
Oh, the heat is very heavy, I tell you for so. I shall sleep full my belly, though he be my brother.
Mankind is a masterpiece of 15th century colloquial English.
Farewell, every son, for ye have done me harm, for ye have brought mankind to mischief and to shame. Mankind, come hither, and raise your left hand. You shall go to all the good fellows in the country about, unto the good way, when the good man is out. He will, say ye. He will, sir.
There are but 6 deadly sins. Lechery is none, as might be verified by us breathless every John. You must go rob, steal and kill, as fast as ye may go. He will, say ye.
He will, sir.
On Sundays, on the morrow early betime, you shall with us to the alehouse early to go din, and forbear mass and matins and oars and preen. He will, say ye.
He will, sir.
You must have for your seat a long departure, as true men rid by the way for to unbrass them, take their money, kick their throats, thus overfast them. He will, say ye.
He will, sir.
Mankind is original, funny and high-spirited, and the language is at last recognisably English. It has emerged from the shadow of Latin and French, and it's exploiting the versatility and richness it has acquired during the last 1,000 years. Highly coloured, playful and self-confident, the English language has come of age. After this triumphant popular debut, the stage is now set for the English of William Shakespeare.
Arise and ask mercy, mankind, and be associate to me.
Ye am not worthy of mercy, be no possibility.
Ope the lips and sigh, miserere mei Deus.
He pray God send us all plenty of his great mercy.
Dominus custodit te ab omni malo, in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Worshipful sovereigns, ye have do me property. Mankind is delivered by me favoral patrociny. No, God preserve him from all wicked captivity, and send him grace his sensual conditions to mortify. No, for his love, that for us received his humanity. Search your conditions with due examination. Think and remember, this world is but a vanity, as it is proved daily by diverse transmutation. Mankind is wretched, he hath sufficient proof. Therefore God grant you all per sua misericordiam, that ye may be playfellows with the angels above, and have to your portion vitam aeternam. Amen.